Folks, Judd Zolgad, Andrew Kramer, 1500ESPN.com. Of course, Kramer covers the Vikings for us at that very fine website. Vikings just wrap up a 3-day mini camp. The last mini camp, or the last camp actually, practice before training camp starts in 5 weeks. So I'll start you off with this, young man. What was your takeaway? If you were to present the headlines from this 3-day camp, what would you tell me about what transpired?
Well, mainly it would be that they are nursing a lot of injuries currently from last year still and new ones from this year, and they hope that they purposely didn't play some or practice with, some of their starting guys like Anthony Barr, Brian Robinson, Phil Lodehold, because they need those guys at full health once they get to training camp. But the main storyline to me is going to be how does this offensive line shake out? They drafted TJ Clemmings in the 4th round, plugged him in at right guard with the full intention to keep him there, and then within 2 weeks of OTAs, they relegated him to second-team right tackle and put Tyrus Thompson for the rest of the practices in there. So clearly that is not all found out, and I think this Vikings team in 2015, at least on offense, is going to thrive or fail with how this offensive line does. They've allowed the 5th most sacks in the NFL in the past 2 years now, they're in company with Tampa Bay, Jacksonville, Washington, just some bad teams in terms of how much pressure they allow on quarterbacks in the past few years.
Sure.
And so with Matt Khalil on that left side, with Brandon Fusco moved over and having to now switch and kind of relearn the position on the other side in terms of just his footwork, his hand placements, all these different things, that is going to be what I'm watching in training camp is can they put that offensive line together and make it successful for Teddy Bridgewater, who's going to need that in order to take that next step. And if he wants to be able to get the ball downfield to Mike Wallace, you need more than 3 seconds to throw the ball. So that is going to be the main thing for me. And then also seeing how this timeshare shakes out in the backfield between Jerick McKinnon, who was capable last year in 6 starts before he got hurt, and Adrian Peterson, obviously, who's never had to share the football before in his career, and nor should he have before. So now those are the kind of main storylines I see going forward with this. And obviously the big part to me is, does Trey Waynes get into the starting lineup in training camp, or is it going to be a 37-year-old Terrence Newman that you start on the outside opposite of Xavier Rhodes? So those are the big storylines I'm going to be watching for going forward. But they got 5 weeks off now, and Mike Zimmer has his fingers crossed that nothing goes wrong. And
no 3 a.m. phone calls.
Murphy's Law has taken over for this team in the past 12 months, and the Vikings hope that bad luck is behind them.
What is your offensive line-wise? What's your best guess here? Khalil's a question mark. He had the offseason procedures done, which if it's a long-term fix or a 16-game fix, fantastic. But if it's not, you're in trouble. Fusco, I like the move from right guard to left guard, but he's got to learn how to play that position. I think he'll be fine. I think he can do it. Center, John Sullivan, you're solid. Right guard, you have question marks. Right tackle, you have a guy who, once again, we're getting into that stage of his career where staying healthy is difficult. So on a scale of 1 to 10 for these next 5 weeks, how well is the head coach sleeping when he thinks about his offensive line?
I would have to think it's right there dead center at the 5, because he knows
not bad.
Because he knows he has, for the state of the offensive line, because you have a rock at center, John Sullivan, really the most important position outside of left tackle along the offensive line in terms of communicating the protection, the stunts, and moving the pocket, and something they struggled with last year, having all those backups. You had Vlad Dukas starting for you, Charlie Johnson, who they cut bait with immediately at the start of the league year, and then obviously Joe Berger. And so you've got all these different movements and stuff. I would say it's at a solid 5 in terms of the concern of the offensive line, because you feel that you have some pieces in there that should be able to take those steps.
Sure.
But you've got big question marks at right guard and left tackle. And is that knee procedure for Matt Khalil, like you said before, is that a Band-Aid here where it's just going to take care for maybe half a season, then it falls apart again? Or is this now going to be in the past for him with those knee concerns? So I still think, though, that's the top thing you're going to be watching. I want to see how this wide receiver group comes together as well, with Cordero Patterson still taking second-team reps. He's been catching passes from Sean Hill the entire offseason workout program, and they've had to stay after at times with Teddy Bridgewater just to get him work with the starting quarterback, because they didn't want to put him in there because Charles Johnson's got his job still. So I think, though, a 29th overall pick who's got the talent that Cordero does, he should be given every opportunity to take his starting job back at training camp, and that's going to start July 25th when they report.
When you say that Trey Waynes has, as far as you've seen all offseason, worked with the second team, do you read into that, or do you just think to yourself, well, this is sort of a natural progression, and if 2 or 3 weeks in a training camp or so, Waynes is playing well, one day you're going to show up at the practice field in Mankato, and he's going to be with the first team, and he's going to stay there?
I think that's just it. I'm not panicking at all about that. There's no reason to worry about that, because with the cornerback especially, and Mike Zimmer said this when they drafted him, they're going to take it slowly with him. They didn't do that with Anthony Barr. They put him in right away at strong side linebacker in the offseason workout program, and they weren't afraid to get him in there right away. With Waynes, though, I think they want to put him under less pressure while he's learning the position. They've got him in the slot, too, trying to learn as many concepts as he can. And the thinking behind that is, well, put a young guy in as many situations as possible and find out what he can do and what he can't. Because how do you know he's not capable of doing that if you never put him in that situation? So you're right, Judd. At some point, I would expect Trey Waynes, 11th overall pick, the highest they've ever drafted a corner in franchise history. The expectation is certainly he should start week 1, and I wouldn't be surprised to see that happen suddenly and at some point in training camp. With Captain Munderland, too, though, a guy that has been relegated to a slot-only role, he is dealing with a foot injury that had him in a walking boot this month, still wasn't able to practice during mandatory minicamp. This is a guy, too, who showed up to training camp last year with a bum hamstring and had to sit out the start of it. So that's why you got Jabari Price, Waynes, learning those slot roles, and you got to really hope that this Vikings team can show up with some resemblance of full health, because last year they never had it, and so far through this offseason workout program they haven't had it either.
What should the confidence be at this point in Bridgewater? Just as far as I think we're all assuming he's going to continue to develop, and part of that's based on the fact that he started out last season pretty good, went through a rough spell, and then to his credit bounced back and played well. As we get set for training camp with that approaching, what should the confidence be from day 1 of year 2 for Teddy Bridgewater?
Well, I think the confidence level, that's not an issue, I think, for the Vikings. They believe they made the right choice at 30.
But I'm saying from your perspective and my perspective, as
Of
far as
Teddy?
outsiders looking at a quarterback, because I think we're all starting to assume that he's going to develop just fine, and we might be right. But from a guy who's seen him a lot, would you assume that, or would you say pump the brakes just a little bit on that?
I would say pump the brakes a little bit, but the optimism is clearly rooted in the fact that what he did last year with nothing around him. He didn't have Mike Wallace. He didn't have Cordero Patterson running correct routes. He didn't have Adrian Peterson in the backfield, and he didn't have a healthy left tackle.
Sure.
You add all these pieces around him, and the obvious hope and optimism, if you're a Vikings fan or if you're the front office and coaching staff, is that he can now take that next step with pieces around him, because look what he did without that. That's where the optimism comes from. But you got to hope. There's plenty of examples of guys struggling in their second year, not just quarterbacks, but every position. And so there's chances that this doesn't go all according to plan right away, but you've got a guy who is the antithesis of Johnny Manziel, and the fact that he doesn't need to go out there and say, "Oh, I got to get my social life in order."
No, he's got it.
That's where you. But
he's
my point
smart
is,
about how he approaches it.
Yes,
yeah.
And that's my point, where you're saying that you shouldn't have any at least premonitions or worries that, well, I'm assuming this is going to go wrong because. There aren't any of those becauses right now. The big thing is, though, is that has he put on enough strength, muscle, frame to withstand the beating and not get hurt? Because after watching these guys throw and run around in shorts, I said this on air and I got made fun of, but their backup situation's not pretty at quarterback.
Sean Hill, you're not a big Sean Hill fan?
Not a big Sean Hill guy, nor Mike Kafka, or that Taylor Heineke who they got undrafted. Those guys didn't look very great. So.
Last thing for you, should there be any concern and or worry about the fact that Anthony Barr has missed so much offseason time? He obviously ended the year hurt with the knee, came back and didn't practice, and I know they've tried to sell that this is not the knee, it's something else which they won't tell you, and they don't have to tell you. But the one thing I always get leery about is when guys start to miss time, and sometimes it means nothing, and sometimes you start to see, okay, now he's sitting out this day with this and this. Do you take anything away from the fact that he was on the field in minicamp, correct? But he was before that very, very limited and/or didn't practice.
He didn't practice at all until this week in mandatory minicamp, and he was limited in what he was given. I take that as just a sign of caution from this coaching staff, and knowing we want him at full health when it comes to training camp. We don't, because Mike Zimmer said it this week. You take it with a rock of salt was his wording in terms of these evaluations when guys are in shorts, because you just can't tell, because they're not hitting anything. They're not playing real football. So the concern was that why push Anthony Barr when the evaluations of what he's doing are going to be very minimal at best. Instead, keep him healthy. So I'm not concerned about that. If he shows up to training camp and they say, we got to hold him out, then you go, okay, what's going on here? Can this guy stay healthy in his second year? Because he had to miss however many games last year with the knee surgery. After that knee injury didn't help him out much. But that's all we're going to have for you this time.
Rest up, young man.
Oh, I'll be
You're
fine.
going to live 5 weeks away from Mankato.
I'll be fine. I'll stay out of hopefully the jail roster like the rest of the Vikings will.
I'll be checking the jail
hoping
roster.
if you're Mike Zimmer.
Ramsey County, Hennepin County. You're from way up north.
I was going to say my
what
range.
county are you from?
My range. I'm not going to tell you because you're going to.
What county is that? They're all online now. I can find out.
Yeah, well, you're going to have to check all the counties in Minnesota.
Thanks,
they're around TCF Bank Stadium, so you got all the names. So
sign off for us.
Thanks for checking back to 1500ESPN.com. Please continue to look back to the website for more updates, news, and analysis. We'll see you down there at Mankato for minicamp.